She was just a hotel housekeeper until she accidentally fell asleep in a billionaire's bed. What should have ruined her life became the start of a love story no one saw coming. Eva Martinez, quiet but fierce, never chased power or wealth, yet somehow captured the heart of Julian Blake, the man who had it all but felt nothing. Gossip, betrayal, public shame, they faced it all. But what came next? That's the part you won't believe. Where are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more unforgettable stories just like this one. Eva Martinez hadn't meant to fall asleep. Not on that bed, not in that room. She had only meant to sit for 5 minutes, maybe 10, to rest her feet and let her thoughts catch up with her body. The Grand Cascade Hotel was a place of opulence and relentless pace, where every corner sparkled and every worker moved with quiet precision. Eva was still learning its rhythms. It was only her 3rd week, and she was already exhausted. The late shift was heavier than usual, and being assigned to clean the penthouse suite, the crown jewel of the hotel, had made her heart skip a beat. She'd heard whispers about the man who owned it, Julian Blake, the tech mogul who rarely appeared in person, who had a reputation for being brilliant, aloof, and utterly untouchable. No one had seen him in months. The room, however, carried his presence like a ghost. Everything was curated to perfection. The scent of cedarwood and bergamot lingering in the air, the minimalistic elegance of the decor, and a piano tucked in the corner, as if it had a story of its own. It felt more like an art exhibit than a living space. She worked quickly and quietly, wiping surfaces, aligning pillows, straightening chairs, each movement deliberate, mechanical. But the silence and the soft hum of the jazz music playing from the sound system lulled her into a strange comfort. The giant king-sized bed, draped in crisp white sheets and feathered pillows, seemed to call out to her aching limbs like a siren's song. She sat down, just for a moment, just until her knees stopped throbbing. Her eyes closed, and the next thing she knew, the world faded to black. The click of the door unlocking didn't stir her. Neither did the footsteps, confident and steady, that crossed the suite. Julian Blake was not expecting company. Certainly not a young woman curled up at the corner of his bed, in a housekeeping uniform with her ID badge still clipped and her shoes lined neatly near the cart outside. He stopped in his tracks, his suit jacket slung over one shoulder, confusion flickering across his usually unreadable face. His first instinct was suspicion. A setup? A gold digger? Some staff member trying to get close for reasons that had nothing to do with cleaning? But then he noticed the exhaustion in her posture, the smudge of fatigue under her eyes, and the way she stirred at his presence like a child startled from a dream. She gasped when she saw him, bolting upright, her cheeks flushing crimson. "I'm so sorry, sir," she stammered, her voice shaky. "I didn't mean to. I didn't think you'd be back so soon." She was already gathering her things, hands trembling as she reached for her supply belt. Her heart thudded violently in her chest. Eva had fought hard for this job. Losing it over something so stupid felt like the final blow in a long string of bad luck. Julian didn't shout. He didn't call security. He just stood there, watching her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher, somewhere between curiosity and restraint. "You're lucky I'm not the kind of man who screams," he said finally, his voice low and calm, not unkind. "But don't let it happen again." Eva nodded rapidly, eyes wide, and bolted for the door. She didn't stop moving until she was back in the staff quarters, her hands still shaking, the embarrassment burning into her skin. The silence of the room wrapped around her like a blanket of shame. She replayed the moment over and over, every detail burned into her mind. To her surprise, the next morning came with no call to human resources, no pink slip, no punishment. Instead, she was once again assigned to the penthouse suite. And when she entered it with hesitant steps, a single note rested on the polished marble table. "Try not to nap this time." Her cheeks turned hot. Was he mocking her, or was he teasing? Either way, one thing was certain: she had caught his attention. Eva returned to the penthouse the next day with her hair tied a little neater, her shirt pressed a little smoother. She told herself it was just professionalism, nothing more. But as she entered the suite and saw the note still resting on the table, she couldn't stop the faint smile that tugged at her lips. Try not to nap this time. The handwriting was sharp, confident, just like the man who had caught her asleep the night before. She folded the note and slipped it into her pocket without thinking. The suite was empty, or so she thought. She moved quickly, beginning with the windows, working her way through the room with the quiet grace she'd become known for. But when she passed the dining area, she noticed a fresh cup of coffee steaming on the table. And beside it, Julian Blake, seated casually with a laptop in front of him, his sleeves rolled up, gaze resting on her. Her heart skipped. She hadn't heard him enter. For a moment their eyes met, and Julian offered a barely there nod before returning to his screen. He didn't say a word, but Eva could feel his attention on her, like sunlight on skin, silent, warm, and impossible to ignore. She focused on her tasks, pretending not to notice, but she could feel every movement magnified, every brush of the cloth, every step across the polished floor echoing in her chest. That became the new pattern. Julian began appearing during her shifts, often quiet, sometimes on the phone, occasionally pretending to read. But he was always watching. Not in a predatory way, not even flirtatious, just present, attentive in a way that no one had ever been with her. And oddly enough, she began to look forward to it. She found herself fixing stray hairs in the elevator mirror, applying a little lip balm before stepping into the suite. It was innocent, she told herself. Just pride in her work. Still, the change didn't go unnoticed. Brielle, a new concierge with glossy hair and a venomous smile, picked up on it immediately. "You're always assigned to his suite," she said one day with feigned curiosity. "Must be nice to be the favorite." There was acid behind the words, but Eva didn't bite. She just smiled and continued folding linens. Brielle, however, wasn't one to let things go. She began hovering near the suite, offering to help Eva clean even when it wasn't her assignment. At first, Eva thought it was eagerness, maybe a desire to learn. But soon it was clear. Brielle wasn't there to clean. She was there to claim. One afternoon, as Eva polished the windows in the living room, she overheard soft laughter from the lounge area. Peeking through the glass, she saw Brielle seated far too close to Julian, tossing her hair and laughing at something he hadn't even smiled at. Eva looked away, focusing instead on the streak of dust she'd missed. The tension mounted. Brielle's presence became a constant shadow. She started whispering among staff, her voice always just loud enough to be overheard. "Some girls use their looks," she said once, too close to Eva's ear. "Some just fall asleep in the right bed, I guess." Eva bit her tongue, kept her head down, and worked. But the pressure built like steam in a kettle. Then one day, as she finished her shift and opened her cleaning cart, a folded piece of paper sat atop the towels. Her name wasn't written, but she knew exactly who it was from. "Meet me here tonight. Don't worry, no cleaning involved." The note was signed with a simple J. She stared at the message, heart pounding. Was this a trap? A joke? Was Brielle somehow involved? But the handwriting was unmistakable, smooth, controlled. Julian's. That evening, Eva stood in front of her mirror, holding the only nice dress she owned. She wasn't sure if it was hope or fear that twisted in her chest, but one thing was clear. This was no longer just about a room, a shift, or a mistake. Something was unfolding, and her heart was already too far in to step back. The rooftop was quiet, except for the soft hum of city life below and the occasional clink of glassware from distant tables. Eva stepped out of the elevator, her simple navy dress fluttering around her knees, her palms slick with sweat. She had almost turned back 3 times. But something stronger than fear kept her walking. Maybe it was curiosity, maybe something else she didn't dare name. When she spotted Julian seated in the far corner, alone beneath a canopy of string lights, her breath caught. He looked up and smiled softly, as if he hadn't expected her but was genuinely pleased she'd come. "I didn't think you would," he said, rising slightly, gesturing to the seat across from him. Eva sat down slowly, her fingers clutching the edge of her clutch. "Why am I here?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Julian leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table. "Because I can't stop thinking about you," he said, the honesty in his voice so stark it disarmed her. "And I usually don't think about anyone." The air between them shifted, thick with tension, charged with something unspoken. Eva didn't know how to respond. She wasn't used to being the center of someone's attention, especially not someone like him. She looked down, unsure whether to feel flattered or afraid. But Julian didn't press. They sat in silence for a moment, sipping drinks, letting the city's lights blink around them like distant stars. The rooftop meeting didn't end in declarations or grand gestures, just a lingering glance, a quiet promise. "You'll be seeing more of me," Julian said before they parted, and he kept that promise. The days that followed blurred into a strange rhythm. Julian started appearing more often, not just during her cleaning hours, but in odd corners of the hotel, leaning against the reception desk, passing by the staff lounge, even catching her on her lunch break to hand her coffee accidentally. It wasn't grand, but it was constant, and it made her feel like she was slowly becoming someone to him. But the attention came at a cost. Brielle wasn't blind to what was happening, and her resentment curdled into something darker. She began to corner Eva in the laundry room, her words dipped in venom. "You really think he's serious about you?" she hissed one evening. "You're a phase, sweetheart. A pretty face from the service cart. He'll move on." Eva didn't reply. She didn't have the words. But Brielle wasn't done. Whispers turned to rumors, anonymous complaints, subtle jabs disguised as jokes in front of other staff. The pressure mounted like a storm cloud over Eva's head. She started questioning everything, Julian's intentions, her own feelings, the fragile sense of belonging she'd begun to feel. Then came the dinner invitation. Julian asked her, quietly and directly, to accompany him to a private evening event. "Not as a housekeeper," he said, "as my guest." Eva wore the only elegant dress she owned. It wasn't designer, but Julian didn't seem to notice. He looked at her like she belonged there, like the room bent around her presence. The dinner was surreal. Soft music, low lights, conversations flowing like honey. For the first time, Eva forgot who she wasn't, until she was reminded. A woman approached their table, tall and dripping with elegance, her smile sharp as glass. "Oh, I see you've taken to the help," she said, eyes slicing through Eva like a blade. "Charming." Julian stiffened, but Eva had already risen, mumbling an excuse as she walked away, her dignity cracking with every step. Back in her quarters, she cried silently. The illusion shattered. She didn't belong in that world. Not with his past lovers flaunting their pedigree, not with the staff whispering her name like a curse. She wasn't angry with Julian, but she was scared. Scared of what it meant to keep standing next to someone who lived in the light when she'd spent her life hiding in the shadows. She didn't expect him to show up that night, but he did. His expression was fierce, not with anger, but with protectiveness. "Don't let people like her define your worth," he said, reaching for her hand. "Especially not someone I stopped loving a long time ago." It was the first time he'd said anything close to love. And it terrified her more than anything. After that night, Eva tried to distance herself. She told herself it was better this way. Cleaner, safer. She couldn't afford to lose herself in someone like Julian Blake. Not when she had spent her entire life trying to prove she was more than the circumstances she came from. But the more she pulled away, the harder he leaned in. He started appearing at her workstations, dropping by under the pretense of checking something or bringing her a coffee he accidentally ordered two of. His presence was calm but persistent, and though Eva refused to let herself get swept up again, she couldn't deny the way her heart stirred every time he walked into a room. Brielle, meanwhile, was unraveling. The more she saw Julian and Eva's quiet, undeniable connection, the more desperate she became. She tried befriending Julian's assistant, feeding her bits of gossip she made up about Eva, about a secret relationship with a former manager, about supposed ambitions to trap a rich man. Some of it made its way back to Julian, but instead of pulling away, he did the opposite. One late afternoon, he asked Eva to clean his private penthouse suite, not the one at the hotel, but the one he actually lived in, several blocks away. When she arrived, she expected an empty home and a checklist of tasks. Instead, Julian was already there, seated by the window, the city stretched out in gold behind him. "I don't want you to clean," he said softly when she walked in. "I just want you to stay." Eva stood frozen for a moment. Her instinct screamed to run, to keep her distance, protect what little stability she had left. But something in his voice, in the quiet way he looked at her, told her this wasn't a trap. This was real. So, for the first time, she stayed. They didn't do much. They talked, for hours, about music, about childhoods, about fears neither of them had voiced to anyone else. They shared old songs and bad jokes, and at some point, her laughter came easier. At some point, she leaned against his shoulder, and when her eyes grew heavy, he didn't move. She fell asleep like that, not out of exhaustion, but out of trust. When she woke the next morning, he was still there, watching the sunrise with a soft smile. He handed her a piece of toast and said, "I've had chefs make food worth hundreds of dollars. None of it ever tasted like this." Eva blushed, but the warmth didn't last long. By the time she returned to the hotel, the photo had already made its rounds. Grainy, taken from a distance, but clear enough to show her entering Julian's private elevator. The whispers spread like wildfire, and by midday she was summoned to the manager's office. Her chest tightened as she stepped in, finding her supervisor holding a printed copy of the image. She braced herself, but before the manager could utter a word, Julian walked in, calm but commanding. "Is there a problem?" he asked, his voice clipped. The manager fumbled with his words, trying to explain the situation, but Julian cut him off. "Eva works for me. What she does after hours is none of your concern." The room fell into stunned silence. Eva, though grateful, felt exposed in a way she hadn't expected. That night, she confronted him, voice trembling. "You can't keep rescuing me," she said. "Every time you step in, it reminds everyone how different we are. It makes it harder for me to stand on my own." Julian looked at her, pained. "I didn't mean to hurt you. I care, Eva. More than I ever meant to." She nodded, then turned and walked away. She needed space, not because she didn't feel the same, but because she did. And that terrified her even more. Eva poured herself into her work in the days that followed. She took extra shifts, scrubbed floors that didn't need scrubbing, organized closets no guest would ever see. It was easier to lose herself in order than to face the chaos inside her heart. She ignored Julian's messages, let his calls go unanswered, and avoided any hallway that might intersect with his path. But despite her efforts to disappear, she couldn't stop the ache in her chest every time someone mentioned his name, or when she caught a trace of his cologne lingering in the elevator. What surprised her, though, was that other people began noticing her too. Guests started requesting her by name. "The kind one," they'd say, "the girl with the gentle touch." Her absence left ripples in the hotel's rhythm. Staff who once rolled their eyes at her now offered polite nods. Even Brielle's snide remarks started fading as her efforts to discredit Eva lost traction. Then one afternoon, Eva was called to the general manager's office. Her heart dropped. She braced for another fallout, another confrontation. But instead, the manager smiled and handed her a letter. "You're being promoted," he said, "supervisor of guest services." Eva blinked. "I what?" "You earned it," he added. "Everyone sees it. Maybe it's time you did too." Stunned, she walked out in a daze. Pride and disbelief warred inside her. Had Julian had a hand in this? But when she asked, the manager shook his head. He didn't need to say a word. You did the work. Everyone noticed. That evening, as the sun dipped low, Eva found herself on the hotel rooftop again, the very place where this entire tangled story began. She leaned against the railing, letting the breeze cool her skin. That's when Julian appeared. "You did it," he said softly, pride glowing in his eyes. "I thought you had nothing to do with it," she replied, a teasing smile tugging at her lips. "I didn't," he said. "But I'm still proud of you." He extended his hand. "Come with me. No pressure, no expectations, just a walk." And this time, Eva didn't hesitate. What followed was a quieter chapter. They didn't rush back into what they were. Instead, they learned to exist side by side, slowly rebuilding trust with late-night walks and coffee breaks stolen between meetings. Julian respected her space. Eva appreciated his patience. Their relationship, no longer a whispered rumor, blossomed in plain sight, fragile but real. Of course, not everyone was pleased. Brielle, now fully sidelined, made one final, desperate move. She printed dozens of flyers with the photo of Eva entering Julian's penthouse and scrawled across them in red marker. "From cleaning to climbing, how to sleep your way to the top." By morning, they were plastered across hotel walls, stuffed into guest newspapers, slipped under staff lockers. Eva was crushed. She locked herself in the staff quarters, shaking with shame. Her hands trembled as she pulled one of the flyers from her locker. Her face stared back at her like a punch. All her hard work, all her progress reduced to a cruel headline. But Julian didn't let it stand. He ripped down every flyer himself. Then, that very afternoon, he held a press meeting. Not a vague statement, not a half-hearted defense, but a declaration. "This woman," he said, standing beside her photo, "is not a scandal. She's someone I admire. She's someone who earned everything on her own merit, and I won't let anyone rewrite that truth." The press went wild, but so did the hotel. Brielle was fired immediately. No fanfare, just silence and disgrace. Eva didn't feel triumphant, she felt exposed, and later that night she asked Julian, "What happens now?" He looked at her, steady and sincere. Now we keep going, together, if you'll have me." Eva exhaled slowly. The road ahead still felt uncertain, but for the first time in a long time she wasn't afraid to take the next step. Not alone, together. In the quiet after the storm, Eva and Julian's story leaves us with a powerful reminder. Where you come from doesn't define where you're allowed to go. Eva didn't have connections or designer clothes, but she had integrity, work ethic, and courage. She faced judgment, jealousy, and public shame, but never let any of it make her bitter. Instead of hiding from her past, she embraced it and used it to build something better. That's real strength. Julian, for all his wealth, discovered that success isn't about status or headlines. It's about who stands beside you when no one else does. In choosing Eva, he didn't just find love, he found his humanity again. Their journey wasn't perfect. It was messy, vulnerable, and at times deeply painful. But it was real. And in a world that often values image over truth, real is everything. So here's the lesson. Don't ever let anyone tell you that you're less than because of your job, your background, or your silence. You matter. And sometimes, the people who quietly hold the world together are the ones who end up changing it forever. Now tell me, where are you watching from? I'd love to know which city, which country, or even which small corner of the world you're in right now. And if this story touched you even a little, make sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next one. Because sometimes, all it takes is a story to remind you, you're more powerful than you think.